I should have seen the disaster coming the moment Patricia Whitmore knocked on my door that frigid January morning in Duluth, Minnesota, clutching her ridiculous HOA violation notice like it was a sacred document. My name is Kevin Harper, and I had just finished installing heating cables along the edge of my roof to prevent ice dams. I was 42 years old, recently divorced, and living in a 2-story townhouse complex called Lakeview Heights. The building was one of those weird architectural compromises where my unit sat directly above a storage facility that the HOA rented out to residents. My specific unit was positioned right over storage unit 17, which happened to belong to the HOA itself. They kept all their landscaping equipment, seasonal decorations, and God knows what else down there. The heating cables were a necessity in Duluth. Anyone who has lived through a Minnesota winter knows that ice dams can destroy a roof faster than you can say workers' compensation claim. The temperature had been hovering around 15 degrees for weeks, and the forecast showed no signs of improvement. I had watched my neighbors deal with water damage, collapsed gutters, and ruined insulation. I was not about to let that happen to me. Patricia stood there in her puffy white coat, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, holding that paper out like she was serving me a warrant. She was probably 55, with the kind of face that seemed permanently arranged in disapproval. As the HOA president, she took her duties with the seriousness of a federal judge. "Kevin Harper?" she asked, even though she knew exactly who I was. We had lived in the same complex for 3 years. "That would be me," I said, keeping the door mostly closed because it was cold as hell outside. "I am issuing you a formal violation notice regarding the unauthorized exterior modifications to your property. You have installed heating cables on your roofline without seeking approval from the HOA Architectural Review Committee." I stared at her. "You have got to be kidding me. These are heating cables. They prevent ice dams. This is Minnesota." She shook her head with that practiced patience that people use when they think you are an idiot. Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that any exterior modifications, including but not limited to lighting, decorations, or attachments, must be submitted for review 30 days in advance. You installed these cables without permission. They are visible from the street and they violate our aesthetic standards. Aesthetic standards? Patricia, they are thin black cables that blend in with the shingles. You can barely see them. They are visible and they are not permitted. You have 14 days to remove them or face daily fines of $100 until compliance is achieved. She handed me the notice, turned on her heel, and walked back down the path before I could even formulate a proper response. I stood there in my doorway, holding this ridiculous piece of paper, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air. The heating cables had cost me $400 to purchase, and another $200 to have professionally installed. They were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, keeping my roof clear and preventing the kind of ice buildup that could cause thousands of dollars in damage. I called my neighbor, Marcus, who lived 2 units down. He was a mechanical engineer, practical-minded, and had dealt with Patricia before. "She cited you for heating cables," Marcus laughed when I told him. "That woman would cite you for breathing if she could find a bylaw against it. What should I do? You could fight it. Request a hearing with the HOA board." But honestly, Kevin, I have been to those meetings. Patricia runs them like a dictatorship. The other board members are terrified of her. She once made Janet Rodriguez cry over a garden gnome. So my options are remove the cables and risk my roof, or keep them and pay $100 a day, pretty much. Or you could move, but the housing market is garbage right now. I hung up and looked at the notice again. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out on a Tuesday evening. I decided I would at least try to plead my case. Maybe the other board members would have some sense, even if Patricia did not. Those 2 weeks were tense. Every day I came home from my job at the engineering firm expecting to see another violation notice. The heating cables kept working beautifully. While other units in the complex had icicles the size of baseball bats hanging from their gutters, mine remained clear. The irony was not lost on me. The hearing took place in the community room of our complex, a depressing space with fluorescent lights and cheap folding chairs. Patricia sat at a table up front with the other 2 board members. Harold Chen, a quiet accountant who never made eye contact, and Deborah Manning, a retired teacher who seemed nice enough but clearly deferred to Patricia on everything. About 7 other residents were there, mostly to watch the drama unfold. Marcus gave me a supportive nod from the back row. We are here to address the violation issued to Kevin Harper regarding unauthorized exterior modifications. Patricia began, reading from her notes. Mr. Harper, you have installed heating cables on your roofline without architectural approval. Do you dispute this? I do not dispute that I installed them, I said, standing up, but I dispute that it should be a violation. These cables prevent ice dams, which can cause serious structural damage. Every winter in Duluth, people deal with this problem. The cables are a preventative measure that protects not just my property but the building as a whole. The bylaws are clear, Patricia said. Any exterior modification requires approval. I understand that, but the approval process takes 30 days minimum. We were already into winter when I installed these. An ice dam can form in a matter of days. By the time I got approval, the damage could already be done. Deborah Manning shifted in her seat. I see his point, Patricia. My sister had an ice dam 2 years ago. It cost her $12,000 to repair. Patricia shot her a look that could freeze lava. The bylaws exist for a reason, Deborah. If we allow one person to bypass the approval process, everyone will think they can do whatever they want. But this is a safety issue, I pressed. Not a decoration, not a cosmetic change. This is protecting the building. Harold Chen finally spoke up, his voice soft. What if we required him to submit a retroactive application? If approved, he keeps them. If denied, he removes them by spring. That sets a terrible precedent, Patricia said. No, the cables must be removed within the original 14-day period which expires this Friday. If they are not removed, fines will begin accruing. The vote was 2-1. Deborah voted in my favor, but Harold sided with Patricia. I was ordered to remove the cables. I left that meeting furious. Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. That was brutal, man. I am sorry. This is insane. She's going to force me to remove safety equipment in the middle of winter. What are you going to do? I thought about it for a long moment, looking up at my unit, at the dark cables barely visible against the roofline, doing their job quietly and efficiently. Then I thought about Patricia's smug face, her absolute certainty that rules mattered more than common sense. I am going to remove them, I said. And then I am going to let nature take its course. Marcus's eyes widened. You sure about that? She wants the cables gone. Fine. They will be gone. But I am not responsible for what happens after that. That Friday, I called the same installer who had put up the cables. He was a guy named Tom, mid-50s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades working outdoors. You want me to take them down? He asked, incredulous. In the middle of winter. Kevin, those cables are the only thing preventing an ice dam on your roof. Your unit gets full southern sun exposure, which means snow melts during the day and refreezes at night. That is prime ice dam conditions. I know, I said. but the HOA is fining me $100 a day if I keep them. Tom shook his head. Your HOA is run by idiots. You know that, right? I am well aware. He removed the cables that afternoon. It took him about an hour. When he was done, my roofline looked clean and cable-free, just the way Patricia wanted it. Tom gave me one last warning before he left. You have got maybe a week before the ice starts building up. 2 weeks max. After that, you are looking at potential water damage. You sure you want to do this? I am sure, I said, though I was not sure of anything except that I was tired of Patricia Whitmore treating me like a criminal for trying to protect my home. The first few days after the removal, nothing happened. The weather stayed consistently cold, which actually helped. No melting meant no refreezing, which meant no ice buildup. I started to wonder if maybe I would get lucky, if maybe winter would stay cold enough that I could avoid the whole problem. Then the weather changed. It started on a Wednesday. The temperature climbed to 33 degrees, just above freezing. The sun came out, bright and warm for a Minnesota winter day. I could hear the snow on my roof melting, water trickling down to the gutters. By late afternoon, the temperature had dropped back to 22 degrees. By Thursday morning, I could see the beginning of the ice dam forming. A thick ridge of ice was building up along the edge of my roof, right where the heating cables used to be. The gutters were starting to freeze solid. Friday brought more of the same. Daytime temperatures in the low 30s, nighttime temps in the teens. Each cycle made the ice dam bigger. By Friday evening, there were icicles 2 feet long hanging from my gutters. I could see the ice pushing up under the shingles. Marcus came over Saturday morning. Dude, your roof is getting bad. You can see the ice dam from the street. I know. Are you going to do anything about it? Like what? Put the cables back up and get fined into bankruptcy? No, I followed their rules. They wanted the cables gone. The cables are gone. But the ice is going to cause damage. Probably, I agreed. The question is where that damage is going to happen. I had done my research after the hearing. My unit's layout meant that any water infiltration from an ice dam would not affect my living space directly. The way the roof was constructed, water would flow down into the walls and, eventually, into the storage area below. Specifically, into Storage Unit 17, which belonged to the HOA. I was not actively trying to cause damage. I was simply following the rules Patricia had insisted on. If there were consequences to those rules, well, that was not my fault. Sunday brought warmer weather, almost 40 degrees. I could hear water running constantly, melting snow finding its way down through the ice dam, looking for somewhere to go. By Sunday evening, I noticed a damp spot on the wall near my bedroom, but it was minor. The bulk of the water was going elsewhere. Monday morning, I left for work as usual. It was my practice to park in the complex's lot and walk past the storage units on my way to my car. That is when I saw Patricia's white sedan parked at an odd angle near the storage unit entrance. She was standing by Unit 17 with Harold Chen, and both of them looked upset. I slowed my walk, curious. "This is unacceptable," Patricia was saying. "There is water everywhere. The boxes are ruined." Harold was peering into the unit with a flashlight. "It looks like it is coming from above, from one of the residential units." I knew I should just keep walking, get to my car, and go to work, but curiosity got the better of me. "Problem?" I asked, approaching them. Patricia whirled around. Her face was red, whether from cold or anger I could not tell. "Kevin." "Yes, actually, the HOA storage unit has water damage. Significant water damage." "That is unfortunate," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Any idea where it is coming from?" "It appears to be coming from your unit," Harold said, still shining his flashlight at the ceiling of the storage unit. "We can see water stains directly below your roofline." "Huh," I said. That is strange. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Do you know anything about this? Like what? Like whether you have a leak, whether something is wrong with your roof. Well, I said slowly, I did have heating cables installed to prevent ice dams, but I was required to remove them, so now I do not have heating cables. And when you do not have heating cables in Minnesota winter, you sometimes get ice dams, and ice dams can cause water infiltration. The realization dawned on Patricia's face. You let this happen on purpose. I followed your rules, I said calmly. You ordered me to remove the heating cables. I removed them. What happens after that is not my responsibility. I tried to prevent this exact situation, but the HOA decided that aesthetic concerns were more important than functional ones. You are responsible for damage to HOA property, Patricia snapped. We will be billing you for repairs. Actually, I do not think you will, I said, because I have documentation showing that I installed preventative equipment, which the HOA ordered me to remove. Any damage that results from that removal is a direct consequence of the HOA's decision, not mine. You might want to call your insurance company. Harold looked uncomfortable. Patricia, he might have a point. He does not have a point, Patricia said, her voice rising. He deliberately allowed this to happen. I deliberately followed your instructions, I corrected. There is a difference. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get to work. I walked to my car, leaving them standing there. My hands were shaking slightly as I started the engine. I had not expected the confrontation to happen so soon or so directly. But I had meant what I said. I had followed their rules exactly. If those rules resulted in damage, that was on them, not me. The day at work was difficult to focus on. I kept wondering what was happening back at the complex, whether Patricia was already calling lawyers or insurance adjusters or both. When I got home that evening, there was a notice on my door. Not from the HOA this time, but from a restoration company called Superior Water Damage Solutions. The notice informed me that they would need access to my unit to assess water damage and identify the source of the leak affecting the storage area below. They requested that I call to schedule an appointment. I called the number immediately. A woman named Sarah answered. Yes, Mr. Harper. We have been hired by the Lakeview Heights HOA to assess water damage. We need to inspect your unit to determine if the leak is originating from your property. Sure, I said, but I can tell you right now what is causing it. I have an ice dam on my roof. The HOA required me to remove my heating cables 3 weeks ago, and now I have an ice dam. Water is getting under the shingles and draining down into the structure. There was a pause. The HOA required you to remove heating cables in January. Yes. And now you have an ice dam causing water infiltration. Correct. Another pause. That seems like a predictable consequence. I thought so too, but the HOA disagreed. Well, I still need to inspect and document everything for the insurance claim. Would tomorrow morning work? We scheduled for 9 in the morning. Sarah arrived with a colleague, both of them carrying various meters and moisture detection equipment. They spent 45 minutes checking my walls, ceiling, and attic access. Sarah took extensive photos and notes. The ice dam is significant, she said, showing me photos she had taken from outside. You have about 4 inches of ice built up along the entire front edge of your roof. Water is definitely getting under the shingles here, and here. She pointed to various spots in the photos. Most of it is draining down through the wall cavity and into the storage area below. You have some minor moisture in your bedroom wall, but nothing critical yet. Yet, I asked. If the ice dam keeps growing, you will eventually have water damage inside your unit too. Usually starts with ceiling stains, then the drywall gets saturated. You really need to address this soon. I had heating cables that prevented exactly this problem. The HOA made me remove them. Sarah shook her head. Yeah, I saw that in the notes. That was a bad decision on their part. We see this every winter. People remove snow retention systems or heating cables because of HOA complaints, then they end up with damage. The repair costs are always way more than the prevention would have been. How much damage are we talking about in the storage unit? From what I saw, probably $8,000 to $10,000. They had a lot of materials stored directly under your unit. Cardboard boxes, fabric decorations, some wooden furniture. Most of it is saturated. Then there is the structural assessment, mold remediation, and actual repairs to the unit itself. And the HOA is trying to bill me for this. Sarah made a face. They listed you as the responsible party in their claim. But between you and me, when I submit my report, I am going to note that you had preventative measures in place that were removed per HOA order. Their insurance company is going to see that, and they are going to have questions. This might end up being a liability issue for the HOA board itself. After Sarah and her colleague left, I felt a strange mix of vindication and anxiety. I had been right about the heating cables. I had been right about the ice dam. And now, there was documented evidence that the damage was a direct result of the HOA's decision. But I also knew that Patricia was not going to let this go without a fight. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Davidson and Associates in downtown Duluth. The letter informed me that I was being held financially responsible for the water damage to HOA property, and that I had 30 days to remit payment of $8,247 and 0 cents for repairs and restoration. The letter included a breakdown of costs and a copy of the restoration company's preliminary estimate. It did not include any mention of the heating cables or the violation notice that had started this whole mess. I immediately called a lawyer. His name was Robert Finnegan, and he had been recommended by a colleague at work. Robert was in his early 60s, with a calm demeanor and a reputation for handling property disputes. So let me make sure I understand this, Robert said after I had explained the situation. You installed heating cables to prevent ice dams. The HOA cited you for a violation and ordered you to remove them. You removed them. An ice dam formed. Water damaged HOA property. Now they want you to pay for it. That is correct. And you have documentation of all this. The original violation notice, the hearing minutes, the removal of the cables. Yes, plus the restoration company's report, which notes that I had preventative measures removed per HOA order. Robert leaned back in his chair. This is actually pretty straightforward. The HOA created the condition that led to the damage by forcing you to remove safety equipment. They are liable, not you. We will send them a response letter making that clear, and we will probably need to file a counterclaim for your costs. Counterclaim. You paid for the heating cables to be installed and then removed. You may have some minor water damage in your own unit that will need repair. The HOA's unreasonable rule enforcement caused you financial harm. We can pursue damages for that. I just want them to stop trying to bill me for their storage unit. We will accomplish that, Robert assured me. But you should think about the counterclaim. The HOA needs to learn that their decisions have consequences. If they can just make arbitrary rules and force homeowners to bear the financial burden of those rules, they will keep doing it. Robert's letter went out 3 days later. It was polite but firm, laying out the timeline of events and making it clear that I would not be paying for the storage unit damage. It also noted that I was prepared to pursue legal action if necessary, including a counterclaim for damages. Patricia's response came in the form of an emergency HOA board meeting, which I was not invited to but heard about from Marcus. She was furious. Marcus told me over beers at a bar called Fitcher's Brewhouse, a local spot overlooking Lake Superior. Apparently, their insurance company is asking a lot of questions about why they ordered you to remove the heating cables. The insurance adjuster told them it might not be covered because it was a preventable situation that the HOA created. Good, I said. Maybe they will think twice before issuing stupid violation notices. Patricia is convinced you did this on purpose. She told the whole board that you deliberately let the ice dam form to damage their property. I followed their rules. I know that. You know that. But Patricia sees it as some kind of revenge scheme. She wants to escalate. I think she is considering a lawsuit. Let her, I said. My attorney is ready, and the facts are on my side. But even as I said it, I felt a knot of worry in my stomach. Legal battles were expensive and time-consuming, even when you were in the right. I did not want to spend the next year fighting Patricia Whitmore in court. The situation got worse before it got better. 2 weeks after the water damage was discovered, the temperature in Duluth dropped to 5 below zero and stayed there for 10 days straight. The ice dam on my roof grew even larger, now a solid mass of ice 6 inches thick at some points. The icicles hanging from my gutters were 3 feet long and looked like deadly spears. More water found its way into the storage unit. The restoration company had set up dehumidifiers and fans, but they could not keep up with the ongoing infiltration. The damage estimate climbed to $12,000. Patricia sent another certified letter, this one threatening legal action if I did not immediately address the ice dam. I forwarded it to Robert, who sent back another response reiterating that the HOA had created this situation and that I was under no obligation to fix it at my own expense. They are getting desperate, Robert told me during a phone call. Their insurance company is balking at paying the claim, and now they are trying to pressure you into fixing the problem so they can close the case. What do I do? Nothing. You hold your ground. The ice dam will eventually melt when spring comes. The damage is already done. Patricia is just trying to minimize her own liability at this point. But living in the complex had become uncomfortable. Patricia glared at me whenever she saw me. Other residents, hearing her version of events, started giving me suspicious looks. Someone left a note on my car that said, "Nice job destroying HOA property." Only Marcus and a few others who understood the full story remained supportive. "People are idiots," Marcus said. "Patricia is telling everyone that you are some kind of vindictive psycho who flooded the storage unit on purpose. She is not mentioning the heating cables or the violation notice. Should I set the record straight? How? Send a mass email? Post flyers? Patricia controls the HOA communications. Anything you say will just make you look defensive." He was right. I felt trapped. I had done everything by the book, followed every rule, and yet I was being painted as the villain. Then, in mid-March, things took a dramatic turn. The weather finally warmed up. Temperatures climbed into the 40s and 50s, and the snow started melting in earnest. The ice dam on my roof began to thaw, releasing a final surge of water into the structure. My bedroom ceiling developed a large brown stain, and water started dripping onto my carpet. I had to call the restoration company back to deal with damage to my own unit. That cost me $3,000 after insurance, which I documented carefully for Robert's counterclaim. But the real development came when a resident named Angela Torres, who lived 3 units down from me, approached me in the parking lot one evening. "Kevin, I need to tell you something," she said, looking nervous. "About the HOA and the storage unit." "Okay." I was at the board meeting last night. Patricia does not know I am talking to you, but I think you should know. The insurance company officially denied their claim for the storage unit damage. They said the HOA created the hazardous condition by ordering you to remove safety equipment, so the damage is not covered. I figured that might happen, I said. That is not the important part, Angela continued. Patricia is now trying to get the HOA to pay for the repairs out of the reserve fund, but Harold and Deborah are refusing. They say it would be irresponsible to use HOA money to pay for damage that Patricia caused. Patricia caused. Harold pulled out the bylaws. He showed that Patricia never actually brought your case before the Architectural Review Committee. She just issued the violation notice herself, without proper authorization. She did not follow the correct procedure. So technically, the violation notice was invalid, and you should never have been required to remove the cables. I stared at her. Are you serious? Completely. Harold went through all the meeting minutes. There is no record of your heating cables being reviewed by the committee because Patricia never submitted them. She just decided on her own that they violated the aesthetic standards and issued the notice. Harold thinks she did it because she has a personal issue with you. A personal issue. I barely know the woman. Angela shrugged. She mentioned something about you parking in her preferred spot once. I do not know, but the point is she exceeded her authority. The other board members are furious. They are talking about removing her as president. This was bigger than I had anticipated. I called Robert immediately and told him what Angela had said. If that is true, this changes everything, Robert said. Patricia acted outside her authority, issued an invalid violation notice, and directly caused the damage. The HOA might be liable, but Patricia herself is definitely personally liable. We need to get copies of those board meeting minutes and the bylaws. Over the next week, Robert worked with Harold Chen, who turned out to be more of an ally than I had realized. Harold was tired of Patricia's authoritarian approach to HOA management and saw this as an opportunity to push for change. The board meeting minutes confirmed Angela's story. There was no record of any architectural review committee meeting about my heating cables. Patricia had acted unilaterally, which violated the HOA's own governing documents. Armed with this information, Robert drafted a formal demand letter to both the HOA and to Patricia personally. The letter demanded that the HOA officially rescind the violation notice, acknowledge that I had acted properly in installing the heating cables, and compensate me for the costs I had incurred, including installation and removal of the cables, damage to my unit, and legal fees. The total came to approximately $8,000. The letter to Patricia personally put her on notice that if the HOA did not resolve this matter, I would pursue a lawsuit against her individually for damages, harassment, and abuse of authority. The response was swift. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, which I was invited to attend. This time, the meeting was held on a Saturday afternoon, and about 20 residents showed up, having heard through the grapevine that something big was happening. Patricia looked smaller somehow, less imperious. She sat at the table with Harold and Deborah, but there was clear tension between them. Harold spoke first. We have reviewed the circumstances surrounding the violation notice issued to Kevin Harper regarding roof heating cables. After careful examination of our procedures and bylaws, we have determined that the violation notice was improperly issued without proper committee review. Therefore, the violation notice is hereby rescinded, and Mr. Harper is officially cleared of any wrongdoing. There were murmurs from the other residents. Patricia's face was bright red. Furthermore, Harold continued, The board has determined that the water damage to HOA property was a direct result of the improper violation notice. Mr. Harper properly installed safety equipment to prevent ice dams, and he was improperly ordered to remove that equipment. The damage that resulted is not his responsibility. The board has also reviewed President Whitmore's conduct in this matter, Deborah added, her voice gentle but firm. We have determined that she exceeded her authority by issuing violation notices without proper committee review. This is not the first time such concerns have been raised. Therefore, the board has voted to remove Patricia Whitmore as HOA president, effective immediately. The room erupted. Several residents started talking at once. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice shaking. "I have served this community for 6 years. I have maintained standards and protected property values. This is a witch hunt." "Patricia, you violated our own bylaws," Harold said quietly. "You issued violation notices without authorization. You caused significant financial damage to HOA property. You refuse to take responsibility. We do not have a choice." Patricia looked around the room, seeming to search for allies, but found only uncomfortable faces. Even the residents who had been giving me dirty looks seemed to understand that she had gone too far. She grabbed her bag and walked out without another word. The meeting continued without her. Harold was appointed interim president. The board voted unanimously to accept my demand for compensation, agreeing to pay $8,000 to cover my costs. They also voted to modify the bylaws to explicitly allow roof heating cables and other ice dam prevention systems without architectural review, acknowledging them as necessary safety equipment rather than aesthetic modifications. After the meeting, several residents approached me to apologize. They had only heard Patricia's version of events and had not realized the full story. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, man. You actually did it." "I just followed the rules," I said. "Turned out the rules were on my side all along, but the story did not end there." 3 days after her removal as HOA president, Patricia filed a lawsuit against the HOA board, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. Her lawsuit alleged that she had been targeted by board members who wanted to seize power, and that the heating cable issue was merely a pretext for removing her. Robert was not surprised. People like Patricia do not go down quietly, but her lawsuit has no merit. She was not an employee, so there is no wrongful termination, and everything the board said about her was documented fact, so there is no defamation. This will get dismissed. He was right. Patricia's attorney withdrew the lawsuit 6 weeks later after reviewing the evidence. But Patricia's downfall was not quite complete. In April, as part of the cleanup of HOA records, the new board conducted an audit of the organization's finances. Harold, using his accounting background, went through 3 years of books. What he found was troubling. Patricia had been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses. Nothing massive, but a pattern of small charges, dinners out, online shopping, gas for her personal vehicle. Over 3 years, she had embezzled approximately $14,000 from the HOA. Harold presented the findings to the board, and they unanimously voted to report it to the police. This was no longer just a HOA squabble. This was theft. I heard about it from Marcus, who had heard it from Angela, who had been at the board meeting. "They are pressing charges," Marcus told me. Patricia apparently broke down when Harold confronted her with the credit card statements. She admitted to it, but said she had planned to pay it back. "That is still embezzlement," I said. "Yep, the police are involved now. This is going to get messy." It did get messy. Patricia was arrested in late April and charged with felony theft. The local newspaper, the Duluth News Tribune, picked up the story, running a headline that read, "Former HOA President Charged with Embezzling from Homeowners Association." The article detailed both the embezzlement charges and the heating cable controversy that had led to her removal. Suddenly, people were calling me. Former residents who had moved out of the complex after conflicts with Patricia. Current residents who had their own horror stories about her authoritarian management. Even a reporter from the newspaper wanting to interview me. I declined most of the attention, but I did speak with the reporter, a woman named Jennifer Carlson, because I wanted the full story on record. "So you installed heating cables. She ordered you to remove them, and that led to discovering she had been embezzling," Jennifer asked during our phone interview. That is the basic timeline, yes, but it is important to understand that I was not trying to expose her. I was just trying to protect my roof. The embezzlement only came to light because the new board did their due diligence after she was removed. Do you feel vindicated? I thought about that. I feel like the system worked eventually. It took longer than it should have, and it was more stressful than it needed to be, but the truth came out. Patricia abused her authority, and now she is facing the consequences. The article ran the next day. It was fair and thorough, laying out the timeline of events without sensationalizing anything. Several residents were quoted saying they were relieved Patricia was no longer in charge. Patricia's criminal case moved forward through the summer. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not inclined to be generous. Embezzlement from a homeowners association, while not the most glamorous crime, was still theft from an organization meant to serve its community. In August, Patricia pleaded guilty to felony theft. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, ordered to pay full restitution of $14,000 plus court costs, and required to perform 300 hours of community service. She also received a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state of Minnesota. By then, life at Lakeview Heights had mostly returned to normal. Harold served out the rest of Patricia's term as president and did a good job of it, running meetings efficiently and actually following the bylaws. The heating cables went back up on my roof in October, this time with full HOA approval and even some compliments from neighbors who appreciated that I was protecting the building. The storage unit below my unit was fully repaired and restored by summer. The HOA's insurance eventually paid part of the claim after a lengthy negotiation, and the reserve fund covered the rest. No residents had to pay special assessments, which everyone was grateful for. I received my $8,000 settlement from the HOA in May. It covered all my costs and then some. Robert's legal fees were reasonable, and I ended up slightly ahead financially, though that had never been my goal. The damaged items from the storage unit were mostly seasonal decorations and old landscaping equipment, nothing irreplaceable. The HOA took it as an opportunity to clean house and get rid of accumulated junk. In a way, the flood had forced a necessary purge. Looking back on the whole saga, I realized how easily it could have been avoided. If Patricia had just approved the heating cables from the start, or if she had allowed the architectural committee to review them properly, none of it would have happened. The ice dam would not have formed. The storage unit would not have flooded. Her embezzlement might never have been discovered, though that probably would have caught up with her eventually. But Patricia had been so convinced of her own authority, so certain that rules were more important than common sense, that she had set in motion a chain of events that destroyed her reputation and led to criminal charges. It was a perfect example of how a little bit of power could corrupt someone who was already inclined toward controlling behavior. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons. I learned that sometimes the best response to unreasonable authority is simple compliance followed by natural consequences. I learned that documentation is everything. I learned that patience and a good attorney can make all the difference. But mostly, I learned that heating cables are not just a good idea in Minnesota winters. They are essential. And no HOA bylaw, no matter how strictly enforced, can change the laws of physics. Ice dams form when warm air meets cold surfaces and melted snow refreezes. You can either prevent that with heating cables, or you can deal with the water damage afterward. There is no third option. The following winter, I noticed that several other units in the complex had installed heating cables. Harold had not only approved them all but had actually sent out a newsletter encouraging residents to consider them as a preventative measure. He included information about proper installation, recommended vendors, and even explored the possibility of getting a group discount if enough residents wanted them. That was the kind of leadership the HOA should have had all along. Practical, focused on actually helping residents rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. It made living at Lakeview Heights pleasant again. I ran into Deborah Manning at the grocery store in December, about a year after the whole thing had started. She was picking out apples in the produce section and she recognized me. "Kevin, hello," she said warmly. "How are you doing?" "Good, thanks." "How are things with the HOA?" "Much better." "Harold is doing a wonderful job. We actually have people volunteering to serve on committees now." It is amazing what happens when people do not dread board meetings anymore. "That is great to hear." She hesitated, then said, "I want to apologize for not standing up to Patricia sooner. I knew she was overstepping, but I was intimidated by her. I should have supported you from the beginning." "You voted in my favor at the hearing," I reminded her. "Yes, but I could have done more. I could have challenged her authority. I could have insisted on proper committee review. I let her bully people for too long because it was easier than confronting her." "Well, it worked out in the end." "It did," she agreed. "But it should not have taken a crisis to make us do the right thing. That is what I tell people now when they ask about the whole situation. Sometimes good people let bad things happen because confrontation is uncomfortable. But if we had confronted Patricia's behavior earlier, we could have saved everyone a lot of trouble." She was right, of course. Organizations are only as good as the people running them, and those people need accountability. The HOA bylaws were actually pretty reasonable. The problem had been Patricia's interpretation and enforcement of them. Once she was removed, the same bylaws functioned just fine. I also learned something about the nature of malicious compliance, which is essentially what I had done. I had followed Patricia's rules exactly, knowing that those rules would lead to a negative outcome. Some people might say that was unethical, that I should have fought harder or found another solution. But I had tried to fight. I had gone to the hearing, made my case, and been overruled. I had consulted an attorney and been told that my options were limited. At some point, you have to let people experience the consequences of their own decisions. That is not malicious. That is just reality. The ice dam was always going to form once the heating cables were removed. That was not something I caused or could have prevented without violating the HOA order. The water damage was a direct and predictable result of Patricia's decision. I had warned her. The installer had warned her. Basic physics warned her. She chose to ignore all of it. So yes, I knew what would happen when I removed those cables. But I also knew that fighting Patricia through official channels had failed. Sometimes, you have to let natural consequences do the teaching that words cannot accomplish. By the second winter after the incident, the heating cable saga had become something of a legend in the complex. New residents would hear the story and shake their heads in disbelief. The HOA president made someone remove ice dam prevention equipment in Minnesota. What was she thinking? Nobody had a good answer to that. Patricia had disappeared from the community after her sentencing. Someone said she had moved to Arizona, which seemed fitting. No snow, no ice dams, and presumably fewer opportunities to abuse HOA authority. Marcus and I still laughed about it, sometimes over beers at Fitcher's. "Remember when you told me you were going to remove the cables and let nature take its course?" Marcus said one evening. "I thought you were crazy. I thought Patricia was going to destroy you. She tried. But you were playing the long game. You knew the ice dam would happen, and you knew it would hurt the HOA more than it hurt you." "I did not know for sure," I admitted. "I just knew I was out of options, and I knew that if there was going to be damage, it would be Patricia's fault, not mine. I just had to make sure everyone else understood that too." "Well, it worked. You became a folk hero, the guy who stood up to the tyrannical HOA president and won." I laughed. "I would not go that far. I just wanted to keep my roof from leaking." "Yeah, but you ended up exposing an embezzler and getting her removed from power. That is pretty heroic." "That was Harold and the board. I just provided the catalyst." But Marcus was not entirely wrong. My refusal to back down, my insistence on documentation and proper procedure, had created the circumstances that led to Patricia's downfall. If I had just quietly paid the fines or moved out, or found some way to secretly keep the heating cables up, Patricia would still be in power. The embezzlement would still be happening. Other residents would still be suffering under her authoritarian management style. Sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you cannot predict. You think you are just fighting for your own rights, but you end up changing things for everyone. The final chapter of the story came in the spring of my 3rd year at Lakeview Heights. The HOA board, now running smoothly under Harold's leadership, decided to do something unprecedented. They issued a formal apology to me. It was read aloud at a board meeting and then posted in the community newsletter. The apology acknowledged that I had been treated unfairly, that the violation notice had been improperly issued, and that I had been subjected to harassment and false accusations. It thanked me for my patience and for working through proper channels to resolve the dispute. The apology was not necessary, but it was appreciated. It represented a complete reversal from the culture Patricia had created, where residents were treated as subjects to be controlled rather than as community members to be served. Harold told me privately that he had pushed for the apology because he wanted to make sure nothing like the heating cable incident ever happened again. "We need to acknowledge when we get things wrong," he said. "And we got this very wrong. You were trying to protect your property and our building, and instead of thanking you, we threatened you with fines. That is backwards. I want everyone on the board and in the community to remember this story so we do not repeat it." That seemed like a good legacy for the whole mess. Not just that I had won my particular battle, but that the community had learned something from it. Life at Lakeview Heights continued peacefully after that. I kept my heating cables maintained and running every winter. The ice dams never returned. My roof stayed intact, my gutters stayed clear, and my ceiling stayed dry. Sometimes I would look down at the storage unit below my place and think about that week in January when water had poured through the ceiling, destroying boxes of decorations and causing $12,000 in damage. It seemed almost surreal now, like something that had happened to someone else, but it had happened. And it had happened because one person with a little authority had decided that her interpretation of the rules was more important than common sense, safety, or physics. The heating cables still hung along my roofline, barely visible black wires doing their quiet work of keeping ice from building up. They represented something bigger than just ice dam prevention. They represented the idea that sometimes you have to stand your ground, document everything, and trust that the truth will eventually come out. They also represented the fact that in Minnesota in winter, you do not mess around with ice. You either prevent it, or you pay for the damage it causes. Patricia had learned that lesson the hard way. The HOA had learned it too, and hopefully, the next time someone wanted to install safety equipment on their property, the board would remember this story and approve it without hesitation. As for me, I was just glad to have a dry ceiling, a functional roof, and an HOA that actually followed its own rules. It had taken a flooded storage unit, a lawsuit, an embezzlement charge, and a whole lot of stress to get there, but we had arrived. That was good enough for me. And every winter, when I flipped the switch to turn on my heating cables, I smiled a little. Those thin black wires represented a victory, not over Patricia specifically, though that had been satisfying, but a victory over the idea that arbitrary authority could override basic common sense. The ice never stood a chance.